Hello and welcome to Macabre Mysteries. Like and subscribe and follow on TikTok and Instagram for more scary stories. Serious, Reddit, what are your creepy encounters with something that you are convinced was paranormal? I work nights at a hotel, and here's the highlight reel of the weird shit I've experienced firsthand or heard about secondhand. I saw a man in the kitchen who also saw me. I thought he was a guest. He levitated out the door. I tried to chase him anyway. He vanished. I saw a mid-20s woman in a little white dress and black flats approaching me at the desk. As I looked up, she stepped around a pillar in the lobby. When I tried to follow her a moment later, she was gone. There's nowhere she could have gone to. I saw a woman in a black funeral gown walk across our business center. I later realized that she would have had to walk through a wall and a window in order to have entered and exited the way she did. A former coworker and I were having a conversation, and he paused because he saw someone in a big black gown walking slowly across the parking lot, only to then vanish behind a car and not reappear on the other side. I used to hear big heavy boots following me on one of the upstairs hallways. Two of my former supervisors used to see a massive figure following their reflections in windows on that same upstairs hallway. My current supervisor got a call April 2020 from the last guest in the hotel that someone had been stomping up and down the hall. Yes, the same hall. My current AGM had to go turn off all the lights in all the rooms of the building and heard someone slamming bathroom doors in rooms she had already visited. No one was upstairs. The same AGM saw a ball of light on the security monitor float from the elevator over to the front desk, drift back and forth for a minute, then vanish suddenly. She routinely heard voices. The same AGM had a package of napkins thrown at her when she told a former cook that she didn't believe in ghosts. The former breakfast cook fled the kitchen one morning because the door had closed on its own, the pot of boiling water on the stove had rotated on its own, and the other 5 burners had lit on their own. The bartender used to routinely see a demonic face leering at her from the other side of the lobby, only for it to then vanish. A guest once saw a bin of bartending tools throw itself 5 feet across the bar. Another guest 2 years later saw his wallet and phone throw itself 5 feet across his room twice, while his sister and I were on the first floor discussing the paranormal. He opted to leave immediately and pick her up in the morning. I worked graveyard shift in a dementia ward for 4 years, and it was anything but quiet. I was working with a nurse one night when we both heard a resident say, "Excuse me." We looked around and no one was there. I checked on the resident in question, and she was fast asleep in her own room. Many of us also experienced someone whistling in the ward late at night, and one nurse even managed to catch a video of it happening. It was unnerving to say the least. Former atheist, now I just don't know. I feel like something is out there, but I don't know because I can't understand what happened to me. Brief backstory, had a falling out with my mom. Didn't speak to each other for about 2 years. When I was a little kid, my mom would push her fingernails into my back and just scratch my back all over. It was such a calming feeling and was something I really enjoyed when I was really upset. So I'm sitting at home one day, playing with my dog. I sit on the couch and get this really weird feeling, like sorrow and sadness. Suddenly, I feel a calming nail scratch all over my back. I'm sort of freaking out, but also enjoying it. Like, what the hell is causing my back to feel like this? What felt like several minutes was probably 20 seconds. Snapped out of it and jumped off the couch, checked my back, and I had freaking scratch marks all over it. 30 minutes later, my sister calls me and tells me mom has passed away about 30-ish minutes ago. That's roughly the same time I was felt with a random bout of sorrow and suddenly had nail scratch marks on my back. I can't explain that, I don't know what happened, and I don't understand it. My best friend and his wife had moved to a new apartment. I came over to visit a few times, and each time I'd see the motion of a cat in my peripheral vision. Not the image of a cat, but a sense of how a cat moves. Anyway, one day I finally cracked some joke about the ghost cat in the place, and his wife was instantly saying, "See, I told you we had a ghost cat." I went to the Betsy Ross house as a really little kid in the early 90s. Normal house, but I was confused why the tour guide never talked about the woman on the chair crying at the edge of the bed in Betsy Ross's bedroom. So I asked about it. No one else saw the woman at the edge of the bed. I figured it was just a wax museum since there was a wax statue of a man in uniform rolling bullets in the basement. Years later, I was looking at haunted Philadelphia tours to go on with a friend, and the Betsy Ross house was on it. I was like, whoa. I was there and looked into it some more. Turns out there is a woman at the end of the bed crying and a uniformed man in the basement that people have reported seeing. There's no way that 8-year-old me would have known about either of these things. This might end up getting long, but I'll try to make it worth the read. One morning, I awoke suddenly. It was a beautiful summer morning. The sun was streaming in the windows, curtains blowing gently in a breeze, birds chirping happily outside. I had a moment of total peace. Then I turned my head and saw a figure standing by the bed. It was a Hispanic lady, dressed in a formal red dress. She looked a lot like the actress Elizabeth Pena. She was looking down at me with an expression that I can only describe as absolute adoration. I remember thinking, oh no, she's confused me for someone else. And then just laying there, convinced that if I spoke she would realize her mistake and be embarrassed. This went on for about 10 minutes, this woman looking at me like I was her cherished offspring. Then I blinked and everything was gone. It was dark and the glow of the moon on the snow outside lit up the room. It had just been a dream, a strange dream, but a dream nonetheless. I managed to forget about it the next day, and so I was surprised the next morning when I awoke suddenly. Bright sunlight was streaming through the window. The curtains rippled in a gentle breeze and birds sang sweetly outside. I turned to look beside me and there she was. She was kneeling beside the bed, arms crossed on the mattress and her head resting in her arms. Again, she looked at me with such pure love and adoration that I just laid there and basked in it, although I was still sure she had mistaken me for someone else. We stayed that way even longer that time, maybe 20 minutes. And then I blinked and I was once again in reality, where it was still night and still winter. I mulled over the dream the next day, wondering at what it meant. I was convinced my subconscious was trying to tell me something. That night, I was anxious to fall asleep and dream. And so, when I woke to the sun streaming in, the curtains waving in a gentle breeze, and their birds chirping merrily, I thought I was prepared. I laid for a moment enjoying the sights and sounds, before turning to where I knew the lady would be. And there she stood, beside the bed. But this was different. She was screaming, her face screwed up in an anxious grimace. She waved her arms frantically, but no sound came from her. It was like I was watching a movie on mute. She continued to try to scream, waving her hands in a desperate, pleading motion. She looked as though she was about to cry. I looked back at her in confusion, unsure what was happening. She stopped her frantic waving and looked defeated. And then, a look came across her face. She raised her hands above her head and brought her fists together. Before I knew what was happening, she brought them down with all her might right on my solar plexus. I woke up gasping, struggling to sit up, struggling to breathe, wheezing as my lungs tried to fill with air again. Back in reality. It is still night and it is still winter. Once I can breathe, I continue to sit up in bed, traumatized by what's just happened. I'm terrified, but mostly because the lady's behavior had changed so drastically. I cannot calm myself, and so I continue to sit up, breathing slowly and deeply. And at some point, I realize that I am feeling a slight shudder in the bed, every 10 or 15 seconds. I listen closely, but cannot hear any sounds over the fan that is running in the corner. But the shudder comes again. I reach down to put my hands on the bed frame and confirm that something is indeed shaking the bed very gently. I quietly and slowly get out of bed. Trailing my hand along the bed frame, I make my way to the foot of the bed. The sweater chest that sits against the footboard prevents me from keeping contact with the bed frame, but I continue to my husband's side of the bed. As I round the sweater chest, the moon reflecting against the snow outside the window offers a dim light, enough to see a dark shadow wedged between the sweater chest and the footboard. I watch as the shape twitches and shudders, my mind not able to make sense of what I'm seeing. And finally, thinking I must still be dreaming, I reach out to touch the shadow. It's my dog. He's tried to retrieve a toy from between the bed and the chest, but had gotten his collar caught in the decorative scrollwork of the footboard. He is twitching and shuddering because he is slowly choking to death. I scream and awaken my husband, who ends up having to retrieve a knife to cut the collar off. He's managed to twist it perfectly around the breakaway portion so that it cannot work. We get him free and sit for hours holding him and crying, afraid to leave him for a moment. He survives without any issues, but I am haunted by the dream of the lady in red. Yes, I know it's very likely that my subconscious had picked up on the vibrations of my dog's struggles and crafted something in my dream to startle me awake. Except for the fact that I have suffered extremely vivid nightmares for my entire life. Had I only had the final dream, I would have done what I did every time I have a nightmare. Roll over and go back to sleep. I only stayed awake that night because the first two dreams had made me start to trust the lady. And so when she so desperately struck out at me, it bothered me on a very deep level. Much deeper than any nightmare ever has before or since. Why did she come to me at all? I'll never know. But I believe that if she hadn't, we would not have found my dog until it was far too late. I was helping my dad clean my grandma's house after she passed, and I went in and was trying to find a song in my phone, and before I heard a cough playing as day come from down the hallway where her room was. She died of lung and throat cancer. It was pretty crazy. This happened when I was in middle school, around 2002/2003. I was playing with the Ouija board with a friend on the bunk bed in my bedroom that I shared with my little sister. My friend and I were on the top bunk playing and connected with a spirit. Being skeptical and wanting to scare ourselves, we kept asking the spirit to prove to us that they were really there. My friend bravely volunteered to put a hair tie on her outstretched finger and hang her arm out over the edge of the bunk bed. We asked the spirit to lift up the hair tie, slide it off of her finger, and drop it to the ground. Whatever we were speaking to, they obliged, because this hair tie levitated off of my friend's finger and suspended itself in air for a few seconds before sliding off of her finger and dropping to the floor. My friend did not do anything to make the hair tie act the way it did. There's no way she could have done it because we tried to replicate it afterwards. Needless to say, it really spooky. We got the scare we were looking for. It wasn't too long after that my parents confiscated the Ouija board, and I haven't messed around with one since. Ouija boards give a new meaning to fuck around and find out. I remember as a young kid I usually used to sit in my bed and watch TV with my room door open while the adjacent guest bedroom next to mine would always have the door shut. I always remember seeing that door fully open and close by itself multiple times a day very slowly and gently. Never really bothered me much now that I think about it, but there were other creepier experiences I had in the same house that made me feel uncomfortable, like I was being watched. My house is pretty old, and me and my siblings would always see some creepy things. I think I'm just gonna list a couple. My siblings and I were all sharing some weird experiences they had, and it turned out all of them had seen the same figure at some point, a moderately tall silhouette of a man wearing a fedora. One of my brothers, let's call him J number 2, had seen the figure walk into his room one night, tip his hat to him, and leave. Two of my other siblings had seen him crouching in the hallway at the foot of their sleeping bags. They had been sleeping in the living room in front of the hall, while I had seen him crouching in the corner of the room. I later told a friend about the fedora hat guy, and they said they had seen him in a couple dreams. I'm not sure where he came from, but fedora hat guy seems like a really nice dude. Love. As a small child, I would have trouble sleeping, still do, and would hear things at night a lot. One night, however, I had sitting in bed. My room was pitch black except for a stream of light through the crack of the door. I looked at it for a bit, my thoughts wandering. Then I had seen a huge figure slowly peek through the door. It wasn't humanoid, it was just a large black mass with scribbled eyes. I froze, and once it was gone I scrambled to my sister's bed crying. Recently I've been seeing silhouettes of people running down the halls or crawling around. It's pretty frequent, so I ignore them, but yeah. Oh, there's this other time a couple years ago when I was trying to sleep. all my limbs safely tucked into my blanket in the very center of the bed. And then I felt a hand from below shoot up and grab my leg through the mattress. I panicked and decided maybe they're mad for being under the bed. And I told them if they stopped scaring me, I'd let them on the bed. I had no clue who or what I was talking to, but I slept with an empty gap next to me for a while. If it was creepy, but I was creeped out, lol. Latino culture, or my country at least, tends to be super believers in that stuff. I'm on the fence, but as an agnostic in a Catholic family, the stories and warnings as a child stick with me. My maternal family home out of the US is 100 plus years old. It's pretty big, and there the houses are very Spanish style, I guess, where there's a patio on the inside and the rooms in the outer square. I was home alone with my grandmother visiting after my grandfather's funeral. He was the first real death in my family and was an absolute gem. The entire family was destroyed emotionally. A few days after his funeral, why we were home alone because literally everyone is always home or we're all out together. I want to get a snack in the kitchen, which in the recent renovations had been my late great uncle's room. My mom and grandmother were so upset that I hadn't really cried it out yet. So I sat on the stool in this dark open-air house and sobbed. I don't know why then, but it just poured out of Ben. 15-year-old me. Context: my grandfather was very sweet and quiet man. Stereotypically, my grandmother was the type of woman who'd throw her slipper at your head for looking at her wrong, but never knew how to show physical affection because of his upbringing. So, awkward hugs aside, he would always pat people on the back. Infamously, he always hit a bit too hard, and I tended to be caught off guard and always stumbled forward. I also hate being in the house alone or unaccompanied because of the superstition. LOL, many of my family members have died in that home, and it's incredibly dark and silent. Stray cats tend to land in the patio, scaring the stuffing out of you at night. I've lived in condos in major US cities my whole life, and I'm a wimp, LMAO. As I'm sitting in this chair crying with my face in my hands, I'm struggling to breathe and cry quietly to not upset my grandmother. I had my feet tucked into the lower ring of the chair. I suddenly feel something hit me in my back pretty hard that I went stumbling off the stool. I scrambled to my feet and kind of froze in the room. I said hello, and immediately realized that's what every brown person says in horror movies before they're murdered, and sprinted to my grandmother's room. LMO. I was pretty shook and told my mom months later, who said it was a sign from my grandfather. I can look back at it fondly now, but LOL, teenage me almost peed her pants. Back when I was really young, I was in my grandparents' house with the rest of my family. I wanted to go play in the garden, but I had to ask if I could, so I went to the cave, cellar/basement if you prefer, to tell my grandpa. He was watching some old TV show on a really old black and white TV, so I asked him. He turned around and said, yeah, no problem, but his eyes were red AF, like I couldn't distinguish his pupil from the rest of his eyes. It was all plain red. I thought it was weird, but didn't bother much. Then I went to the kitchen to tell my parents that I was gonna play in the garden, and what I saw literally petrified me. In the kitchen, there was my parents, my grandmother, and my grandfather. I literally bugged. I rushed back to the cave and found what? Him. He was still there. Then I went back to the kitchen and asked them about Grandpa. They told me that he never left the kitchen. They weren't even joking. Also, he couldn't have left the cave to go there as I left it and went immediately to the kitchen. He couldn't have arrived there before me, and it's literally impossible for him to go to the kitchen without me seeing him. So I went back one more time, and this time nothing. He disappeared. To this day, I'm still clueless to what the freak was. That... I had saved some spooky stuff. Here's one of them. Not my story though. U/Minimesnache story. I had just finished my initial military training, basic, 8, a few other classes, and got sent to my first duty station. My unit was at NTC for pre-deployment training, so I met up with the rear echelon. I get issued my room and spent 3 very disturbed days/nights in the barracks with weird stuff happening, like gear not where I left it, locked drawers being opened, the microwave turning on by itself. Shit like that. My roommate, who I knew throughout training, showed up on the fourth day, and I told him something along the lines of, "Watch your shit. Someone's been fucking with my stuff, and I don't know who." So the fourth night comes around, and myself and my roommate secure a room and gear and go to bed. Gotta be up at 0530 for PT, so it's an early night. We lock all our stuff and go to bed. I woke up around 0100 cause my blanket had fallen to the ground, and I was cold, which was weird cause we were in the south in summer, so it's always hot. I hopped down to get my blanket, and I noticed my armoire is open, so I open the lock, close it, lock it, and get back to bed. I fell back asleep pretty easy, but I woke up again at about 0230, and all my stuff and my roommate's stuff is thrown around the room. I wake up my roommate, and he's pissed cause someone is fucking with us and can't figure out who it is. We clean it up, lock our stuff, and go back to bed. I woke up a third time at 0337, and we're not alone. I can hear my roommate snoring, so I know it's not him. I sat up and saw someone in the little kitchenette area with the fridge open looking in it. I was freezing again. I was about to say something as the soldier turned around. My eyes had a moment to adjust to the bright light, and then I started recognizing gear like the L-shaped flashlight on his shoulder, his Alice pack with magazine holders and canteens, boots and fatigues. This dude was combat ready. As my eyes reached his face, he turned a bit, and I could see it. Half his head and helmet were gone, blown off by the looks of it. I'm scared shitless at this point. He closed the fridge, walked across the room keeping his bright green eyes on, opened my front door and walked out. As he exited, he turned back around and said to me, "Be safe." I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I didn't wake my roommate up. I just sat up in bed for about 2 hours till I had to get ready for PT. 0630 rolls around, so everyone is outside the barracks in formation getting ready to start PT, and the acting first sergeant says, "Hey, not Chase, you good? Looks like you seen a ghost." I replied with, "Negative, I'm fine. 1 SG good to go." About halfway through PT, he comes up to me and asks me what's wrong because I'm visibly shaken up. I told him I was fine, just couldn't sleep last night. A few others asked if I was okay, and I just lied and said I was fine. I really wasn't, and they could see that, but they let me be. After PT ended, the acting 1 SG pulled me to the side and told me to speak freely, openly, and with all confidentiality and off the record. What is wrong? I told him that if I told him what happened, he would think I'm batshit crazy. He assured me it was off record, and once again said, "Talk to me. You seriously look like you've seen a ghost." That got an awkward chuckle out of me, and I began to tell him my story, and when I got to the part about his head, the acting 1 SG lost his SHID. "Who the fuck put you up to this? This is not funny," etc., etc. He smoked me for about 30 minutes, made me do push-ups, mountain climbers, stuff like that, all while yelling at me that I'm a piece of shit. Finally, after about 30 minutes of that, he says, "Look at me in the eye and swear on everything that you love that you're not lying to me." I told him I was not lying. It fucking happened. So he says follow me, so I do. We get to the command office, which I had never been in, and they were obviously locked. He takes me behind 3 locked doors and 3 rooms I had never stepped foot in, and when he opened the last door I saw it. It gave me chills. It still gives me chills, but plain as day there's the soldier's portrait behind the commander's desk. I froze and said, "That's him." Acting 1 SG, the guy who assigned me that room, told me who it was. He was a corporal in the unit on my unit's first deployment to Iraq, and he died in an IED attack that took off part of his head. I was the first soldier to be assigned that room since it belonged to the deceased corporal. He forgave me and I forgave him, and he told me some stories about who this guy was. I deployed with that unit just a couple months later and spent 12 months fighting in that shithole. I nearly died I don't know how many times. My vehicle got hit with IEDs and rockets, and it always made me think of that corporal. I survived more things than most people can image, and I always felt like that corporal was keeping an eye out for me. Not everyone in my unit was as lucky as me. 3 from my company didn't get to come home. Wasn't creepy so much as awe-inspiring. Part of me is convinced it was paranormal, and part of me thinks that's bullshit, and both parts are certain. That's creepy. Was I nuts? Were we all nuts? Here's what I saw a long time ago, written up on Reddit 4 years ago. Okay, I saw a green tiger. I wasn't alone. We were out towards the Cambodian border in summer of 1969, an American light infantry company of about 100 or so guys. We were operating in flatlands, thick jungle, along a river. Saigon River? Not sure. Bright sunny day. We were proceeding single file when Point Platoon came to a stop. There was some yelling. We were stealthy. Yelling is bad. From the point, then Point Platoon radioed for the command post, CP, the company commander and his people, to come up to point. When we got there, we found the point team glaring at each other. Some kind of tussle. Point and Drag were standing in the machine gunner's line of fire glaring at him. The machine gunner had wanted to shoot. Point and Drag stopped him. He didn't like that. The object of discussion was across a jungle opening maybe 15 meters away, just peeking at us over the elephant grass. It was a big tiger, biggest I've ever seen, Frank Frazetta style big, but without the lady. Here's the insane part. The tiger was white where a tiger is white and black where a tiger is black, but all the orange parts were a pale green. We all saw it, maybe 20 grunts and me. The machine gunner was arguing that we have to shoot it, because otherwise no one would believe it. He had a point, but the rest of us were just awestruck. I mean, it might as well have been an archangel, wings, halo, and all. I felt an impulse to kneel. I don't think I was alone. The tiger stood there checking us out for maybe 15 minutes, not worried, not angry, just a curious cat. Then he turned and disappeared. Don't believe me? That's okay. I don't believe it myself. I mean, WTF was that? Hallucinogenic elephant grass? Some trick of the light? The tiger walked through some kind of green pollen just before we saw it? No freaking idea. I don't believe it and I saw it. Or hallucinated it. Me and all my blues. Make of it what you will. I'm done. Wasn't creepy so much as awe-inspiring. Part of me is convinced it was paranormal, and part of me thinks that's bullshit, and both parts are certain. That's creepy. Was I nuts? Were we all nuts? Here's what I saw a long time ago, written up on Reddit 4 years ago. Okay, I saw a green tiger. I wasn't alone. We were out towards the Cambodian border in summer of 1969, an American light infantry company of about 100 or so guys. We were operating in flatlands, thick jungle, along a river. Saigon River? Not sure. Bright sunny day. We were proceeding single file when Point Platoon came to a stop. There was some yelling. We were stealthy. Yelling is bad. From the point, then Point Platoon radioed for the command post, CP, the company commander and his people, to come up to point. When we got there, we found the point team glaring at each other. Some kind of tussle. Point and Drag were standing in the machine gunner's line of fire glaring at him. The machine gunner had wanted to shoot. Point and Drag stopped him. He didn't like that. The object of discussion was across a jungle opening maybe 15 meters away, just peeking at us over the elephant grass. It was a big tiger, biggest I've ever seen, Frank Frazetta style big, but without the lady. Here's the insane part. The tiger was white where a tiger is white and black where a tiger is black, but all the orange parts were a pale green. We all saw it, maybe 20 grunts and me. The machine gunner was arguing that we have to shoot it, because otherwise no one would believe it. He had a point, but the rest of us were just awestruck. I mean, it might as well have been an archangel, wings, halo, and all. I felt an impulse to kneel. I don't think I was alone. The tiger stood there checking us out for maybe 15 minutes, not worried, not angry, just a curious cat. Then he turned and disappeared. Don't believe me? That's okay. I don't believe it myself. I mean, WTF was that? Hallucinogenic elephant grass? Some trick of the light? The tiger walked through some kind of green pollen just before we saw it? No freaking idea. I don't believe it and I saw it. Or hallucinated it. Me and all my blues. Make of it what you will. I'm done. Oh, back in my teen years I lived on an old tobacco farm in Maryland. The property was massive and sold individually. There was a few houses on this old farm and a long narrow road connecting where I lived to a quarter sack. As a kid and growing up with the older neighborhood kids, we were all very close and would tease each other about haunting and ghost sighting and whatnot. But there was the one house at the end of the road I lived on, the biggest house on the old farm that a family well called the Davidsons lived in. It was very old style but remodeled. We always knew it as the White House, as that's where the white farm owners lived. This was a hoax to me and my brother, we always thought, but being the wild kid I was, one day went behind the house adventuring and stumbled across a graveyard. All the headstones very old, and weirdly they labeled Davidson, past relatives down generations. Earliest was 1830-ish. It's been about 30 years. Memory is rough. This wasn't the scary part, this is backstory. Fast forward some time, and it was Christmas 1992, and we had this brand new Sony camcorder. This same year we had a new neighbor, across the farm down the long dirt road. Some context, down this road there were 2 barns, 1 house. This was directly across from the White House, through some bushes, but was not connected by a traditional road. These new neighbors were very curious and lived in the haunted house. This house was very old. I became real good friends with the new neighbor, and he had an older brother who liked ghost hunting. He would explain that they lived in the slave house. We would explore the old barns. They had this basement, some conjuring type shit that we would never go down. It was locked by the previous owner. We found later it was the Davidsons, and never given a key. One night we busted it open when his parents weren't home and went and took a look. Seemed to be an old garage area, but when you walked down the wooden stairs, directly to the left were 2 to 3 nooses and chains. Dirt stains and old clothes all over the floor. We then ran upstairs. A few days later we went in the barn. This is where the paranormal stuff happened. We were always told that an orb would show on camera if a ghosted was sighted, and in the nighttime us curious teenagers used the camera to explore the barn. While taking a video we opened and started to walk around. Hanging on the second level was 3 to 4 nooses and chains on the sides. The nooses were swinging left and right, then a deep loud, I would say, scream. We turned around, ran, but kept recording. When we later looked back at the footage we noticed multiple orbs and feet, dark outline of male or female feet on the sides of the barn where the nooses were hanging.